On the phone, we have a coaching legend. This gentleman won 3 national championships at Nebraska. He's one of the best college football coaches in history, Tom Osborne. How are you doing today, Coach?
Doing fine.
I see that you grew up in Nebraska. Did you always dream of coaching at Nebraska growing up?
Well, actually, I really didn't plan to be a coach. I loved athletics, and I played as many sports as I could: football, basketball, baseball, ran track, and did that throughout high school and then on into college. But didn't plan to coach at all, and spent a short time in the NFL. I was in NFL for 3 years, and had a hamstring injury that was such that realized I couldn't continue to play. So I came back to Nebraska to go to graduate school, and wanted to kind of ease away from athletics. So I thought being a graduate assistant coach would be a good idea for a period of a couple of years. And one thing led to another, and I just never left coaching. And so that's, I guess, one of those rather twisted paths that we all sometimes take.
Now, as a high school student, you were the Nebraska High School Athlete of the Year. I will assume that colleges came calling for you to try to recruit you to play collegiately, but you ended up at Hastings College.
Mm-hmm. Well, I had some offers. I believe Wyoming and University of Nebraska, at that time University of Denver, had a football program. Those were firm offers. I had some other inquiries. But I also liked to play basketball and was a reasonably good basketball player. And the schools that I was talking to all said, well, you got to play one sport. And so for that reason, I chose Hastings College, where I played football and basketball, ran track. And so it was a good experience. At that time, I don't think recruiting was quite as sophisticated as it is today. And Nebraska, even though it was my home state university and the school that I thought a lot of, was not doing particularly well in the intercollegiate scene at that time. So Hastings was the choice that I made, but I did have a chance to play at some Division I schools.
I saw that you played quarterback in college, but you played receiver when you went to the pros. Was there a reason for the position change?
Well, the main reason was simply that the coach of the 49ers at that time, a guy named Red Hickey, called me and talked to me before we started our training camp. And he said, no, we only have 38 spots on our roster. And that was all they had on the pro football team in those days. And they said, we have 2 quarterbacks, John Doty, White, Tittle. And we're only going to keep 2 quarterbacks. Now, if you think you can beat one of those guys out, well, go ahead and do it. Otherwise, you might want to try something else. So I was able to detect what he was trying to tell me, because White Tittle had been all-pro and a starter for about 10 years, and John Doty, of course, was a very, very good backup quarterback from Stanford, and was established, having been there for 3 or 4 years. And so I told him I thought I could be a receiver, because I had pretty good speed, and I could catch the ball. Even though I had not played receiver previously, I made the switch, and so that's what I did in the 3 years in the NFL.
What was it like playing in Washington?
Well, and we weren't very good. We played my first year that I was there. We played over at the old Griffith Stadium. They probably seated maybe 30,000. And the next year we played out at a new stadium, RFK Stadium. And that was a pretty good venue, roughly 60,000 seats. And but we weren't a very talented team, and we didn't win very many games at all. And but it's still an honor and a privilege to play in the NFL. And I think it more or less satisfied any inquisitiveness that I might have had as to whether I could had played at a higher level in Hastings College. And so I was fairly certain I could have competed at the highest level. So that was good. And I saw a lot of great players, played in a lot of cities around the country, and had some experiences I would not have had otherwise.
So how did you end up joining Nebraska's coaching staff?
Well, I told you, when I came back to Nebraska, I was going to graduate school, and Bob Devaney had just been hired from Wyoming. And Bob was still at Wyoming at the time. I wrote him a letter, and he said, well, come in and see me when I get to Lincoln. So I did, and he said he thought he had all the coaches he probably needed, but he realized that they'd had some trouble in the dorm. Some of the players had been pretty much running their corner of the dorm, and the dorm counselors were not permitted to come in. And said, I need somebody to go there and live with those guys and keep track of them. And he said, if you'll do that, I'll give you free room and board and meals on the training table. So I said, okay. And then later that spring, he said he wanted me to come out and coach during the spring. And so one thing led to another, and eventually I became a full-time assistant, and then later followed Bob as the head coach at Nebraska.
And you ascended to the position of offensive coordinator in time for the 1969 season. And if I recall correctly, you had two quarterbacks, Jerry Taggy and Van Brownson,
Mm-hmm.
and a very successful, and a couple of sophomores and a sophomore running back, Jeff Kinney. How difficult was the two quarterback system? How difficult was it trying to sell that to Coach Devaney?
Well, there wasn't any salesman job. They're both good players. They're different kinds of players. Brownson was a very good all-around athlete, had a little more speed. Taggy was a very good thrower and a bigger kid, and kind of hard to bring down, and an excellent passer. And that first year, they pretty much divided things evenly in 1969. In 70, they both played, but Taggy, toward the end of the year, I think, began to play more. And then in 71, Taggy was pretty much starting quarterback the whole time. But they were both talented, and having that kind of depth at quarterback was certainly very good.
When you bring up 1970, all I can think of is Nebraska, Oklahoma, the game of the century on Thanksgiving Day. And I'm old enough to remember watching that game, and I always thought whoever had the ball last would be the team that would win because they were going to score. What was that game like on the sidelines?
Well, I was up in the press box, so I was a little bit removed physically, but both teams were pretty good offensively, not so good on defense. Oklahoma ran a pro-style 6-1 defense at that time. And remember, we started running some counter dives. We'd put our fullback in one direction, and the I-back would counter and run to the opposite side. And their middle linebacker was frozen by that split backfield action, and the center was able to get out of the middle backer, and we created some pretty good creases for Jeff Kinney. And Kinney had a very good day running the ball. And, of course, both teams kind of went up and down the field. And strangely enough, Oklahoma hurt us badly with the passing game. Jack Milgren threw, I think, 3 touchdown passes that day. And we probably were a little more dominant with the running game. And we didn't know much about defending the wishbone at that time. And so both defenses had a hard time. And you're right, we had the ball last and scored the final touchdown, and that was probably the difference in the game. And that was an interesting year because Nebraska ended up being ranked number 1 in the country. Oklahoma was ranked number 2, and Colorado and both of us had Dayton as number 3. So the Big 8 conference was certainly very strong in that particular year.
Was it hard to convince Coach Devaney to switch from the I formation?
No, there wasn't any sales job there because we had considerable success under Bob. His first 4 or 5 years at Nebraska, we won 4 straight Big 8 conference championships, and I think only had 1 loss in most of those years. And then in 1967 and 1968, we had 6-4 records. And in '68, we lost our final game of the season to Oklahoma, 47-0 in Norman. And so people were beginning to complain, and some talked about getting rid of assistant coaches, and some even talked about getting rid of Bob. And so he came to me and said, "Why don't you spend some time and try to devise what you think would work on offense?" And so at that time I was somewhat intrigued by the I formation and went to Bob with my thoughts. And so we transitioned from a full house, unbalanced line offense, which he used primarily at Michigan State when he coached for Duffy Doherty, and then later at Wyoming, and then in the early years at Nebraska. We transitioned from that to the I formation. And of course we happened to have a very fine I back coming along, and Jeff Kinney, and that was helpful.
On that 1971 team, you had a player by the name of Johnny Rogers who returned a punt for a touchdown in that game. For people who didn't have the chance to see him play, to me, he was like the batting player since Gale Sayers, because anytime he got his hands on the ball, he could go for a touchdown. There was no way he was going to, as a kid from Omaha, there was no way he was going to get out of state, was there?
Well, I think he had wanted to go to USC, but they apparently did not recruit him. I don't know if you sent a film to him or not. But he had a few offers, and he chose Nebraska. And Johnny was a tremendous athlete. He had great lateral movement, and he could make you miss probably better than anybody that I ever saw. And so he was a great receiver for us. He was also a great runner. From the wingback position, he'd run counters and reverses. And then actually in his last game against Notre Dame in '72, he played him at I-back. And even though he weighed about 170 pounds, he was a great I-back. And but in the return game, he was fabulous. He was probably the best punt return and kickoff return man that I'd ever seen. And so he was a great player, and probably was worth 10 to 14 points a game just having him on your side.
When you became the head coach at 35, did you think you were ready for the job?
Well, I thought so. Of course, when you're young, you always think you're probably smarter than you really are. And I was 35, and I thought I'd had pretty good experience at Nebraska, and so took over for Bob. And a very different personality from Bob. I was not quite as gregarious, not quite the same sense of humor that he had. And so there was rather stark contrast. Also, I didn't happen to have Jerry Taggy or Johnny Rogers or Jeff Kinney. And so those first few years were a little rocky, but we managed to survive. When we won quite a few games, but certainly no national championships. And but as time went on, we got better, and so ended up being able to stay in one place for 36 years and coaching, 25 of them as head coach, and that's probably something that was very gratifying and certainly much easier on me and my family than what most coaches experience when they make multiple moves around the country.
Did you have much advance notice that Devaney was going to step down and that you would send to take his place?
Yeah, he told me a couple of years before that he was going to step down and would like to have me take over. And so anyway, I knew in advance that was going to happen. Yes.
You finally figured out that Oklahoma wishbone, though, when you went to the dual option quarterbacks. How did you figure that out? Did it just come to you one night, or was that a lot of planning?
Well, I don't think you ever figure something out just one night. We had quite a bit of exposure to the wishbone, and over the years we began to understand better how to stop it. You had to involve your secondary quite a bit in the run game because otherwise you just weren't going to be able to handle the fullback, the quarterback, and the pitch. And so we got better as time went on. And I think the last time we played Barry Switzer in the wishbone, and it was about 1988, I think we held them to about 130 yards. And it was by far our best defensive performance against the wishbone.
How were you able to come up with running back after running back after running back? It would seem as if during the course of a season, if the starter went down, the second string guy would be as good, or the third string guy would be as good. It was not just the guy who started off the game. The depth always struck me as incredible.
Well, we were a running football team and had good offensive lines, and that attracted running backs. And fortunately, we had a lot of really good running backs from Nebraska. You mentioned Jeff Kenny, but we also had people like Amon Green, was a great player from the state, and several others that were very good. And of course, we were able to recruit somebody like Mike Rozier, Roger Craig, and they were from that state. But I think the fact that we ran the ball well, that we recruited running backs hard, that attracted a lot of good players here.
I remember that team and that 1983 team. You guys were just loaded. You had Turner Gill at quarterback. You had Mike Rozier. Your center was Dave Remington. I think was Irving Fryer on that team and Roger Craig. I mean, it just seemed like you were loaded with NFL talent there that you couldn't lose. Dean Steinkooler, I think, too.
Yeah, we had a lot of talent, and certainly when we had Rozier, and in '82 we had Roger Craig in the same backfield with Mike, and then Turner Gill and Irving Fryer, and some very good offensive linemen like Remington, Steinkooler that you mentioned. We were very, very good offensive team. In '82 we lost one game to Penn State, and they won the national championship, and it was the only game we lost, and we were 12-1. And then in '83, we ended up 12-1 again. We lost to Miami in the Orange Bowl, and we went for 2 points and didn't make it. And so we came close both of those years to winning a national championship. We just didn't get there. And we had some great athletes, and over the years we had a lot of really good players. So I'm going to pretty much have to go here. I've got another engagement, so
no problem.
I'll do it for you.
No, just one last question. Was that a tough decision, whether to kick the extra point or go for two?
Well, not at the time. I felt if you're going to win a national championship, you had to win. That was just my mindset. Others have later on agonized about it, but you only have so much time to think, and I thought, no, we thought we had a good 2-point play, and Turner Gill was a very accurate passer, and put the halfback in the flat, and they had a guy who made a play, and Bill got a fingertip on the ball, and we didn't make a 2-point play. I think most of the time we probably would have converted that play, but that's football. You win some, you lose some. Unfortunately, that one was for all the marbles, and we just didn't come out on top.
But you did well, though. You won your 3 championships.
Yeah, and we ended up well at the end. That's right.